So I am taking the liberty of doing the long 1980s and talking about an exhibition, a group exhibition from 1992, titled Crossing Black Waters. Oh, sorry, so that's just the title. And this is the invitation to the exhibition opening. So I'm going to speak about the 1992 group exhibition Crossing Black Waters, which brought together 13 artists from India, Pakistan, and the South Asian diaspora in Britain, namely Saida Drus, Anandmoy Banerjee, Aparna Kaur, Alan D'Souza, Nina Edge, Sushanta Guha, Bhajan Hunjan, Manjeet Lamba, Shaheen Murali, Kudus Mirza, Samina Rana, Anwar Saeed, and Sashi Dharan. The exhibition toured from City Gallery in Leicester to Cartwright Hall in Bradford, Oldham Art Gallery and Museum, and South London Gallery. It was funded by an initial research grant from Arts Council Great Britain, and then by municipal funders, including Leicester City Council, Southwark Council, and Greater London Arts. Crossing Black Waters was curated by Shaheen Murali and Alan D'Souza and organised under the auspices of Panchayat, an alternative arts organisation set up by Bhajan Hunjan, Shaheen Murali, Simrat Pathi, Alan D'Souza, and Shanti Thomas in 1988. So I'm sort of still in the early stages of doing this research, so I'm just going to spend most of the paper doing some mapping around the exhibition, and then I'm going to raise some questions which speak to the conference topic of the Radical Decade. So I'll begin with some background information about Panchayat. So the story goes that gathered in the Slade School of Fine Art canteen in 1988, where Hunjan was working as a teaching assistant in the printmaking department, Hunjan, Murali, Pathi, D'Souza, and Thomas discussed the lack of support for Black and Asian artists in the art establishment, resolving to form Panchayat as an alternative arts infrastructure. This was an expansion of, rather than addition to, their individual practices, which were, among other things, committed to raising consciousness of the social injustices faced by Black and Asian people in Britain and reclaiming their representation. It was Hunjan who suggested using the same name, Panchayat, as the indigenous political system, actually which was referenced in Jocelyn's film. So Panchayat is the indigenous political system in South Asia, whereby villages self-govern under the leadership of 5 elected elders. And this name gestures both to the organization's founders, who were also 5 in number, and more importantly to its design, which was to facilitate grassroots political participation. Although, as a disclaimer, or a caveat, the caste-bound patriarchal nature of panchayats in practice was somewhat at odds with the group's intentions. So in practice, Panchayat coordinated educational programs and workshops in schools and community centres, as well as brokering relationships between artists and institutions, curating exhibitions, publishing books, amassing an archive, and providing studio space for artists. Panchayat existed as the series of dialogues which the founders held in public and at home, and then on paper as a tissue of documents, like the brochure and the newsletter on the screen. And then it later existed in buildings on Folgate Street in London, then at the University of Westminster, and now at Tate Library. So in my PhD, I use Murali's term intermediary agent to describe Panchayat as a link between entities which were previously unrelated. For instance, artists and schools, artists and institutions, artists and academics, artists and activists, artists based translocally and transnationally, and artists past, present, and future. So Panchayat took on curatorial projects from 1989. Each of the 5 artists had worked on exhibitions previously in the 1980s. For instance, Murali at the DIY art production and display space One Spirit Gallery, and Pathi at Greenwich Citizens Gallery. Panchayat's first exhibition was 5 Black British artists at the 3rd Havana Biennial in 1989, featuring Sonia Boyce, Shaheen Murali, Patika Ntuli, Keith Piper, and Alan D'Souza. After presenting another version of this exhibition in London and Toronto in 1991, titled Citing Resistance, Panchayat staged Crossing Black Waters in 1992. And aside from exhibitions, Panchayat was concerned with the display of art more broadly throughout its existence. For instance, the group reproduced artworks on Panchayat stationery, such as folders, and on leaflets promoting the organisation, which were disseminated to their network. And they also ran a slide library within the archive, which, following scholarship on the Women Artists Slide Library, can be thought of as a small-scale exhibition space. Oh, and this is it. So these are a few installations. Oh no, what's happened? Yeah, these are a few installation shots of the exhibition at South London Gallery. But I'm going to move on to talking about the book because of time. So this was the book that was published alongside Crossing Black Waters. And inside, Murali elaborates on the title, stating that Crossing Black Waters refers to a transgression of boundaries, a stepping into the unknown. Kalapani, Black Waters, Kalapani translates as Black Waters, were the oceans surrounding the Indian subcontinent. To cross them was to break tradition and to sever one's links with the motherland. Paradoxically, the same South Asian migrants found themselves marginalised as outcast by institutionalised racism within Britain. Exclusionary immigration laws, restrictive policies in education, employment and housing. Inevitably, South Asian artists faced similar exclusion from mainstream galleries and critical dialogue. Creating visibility, therefore, became the primary task of some practitioners. So here Murali is constructing an analogy between the outsider status of the South Asian diaspora in Britain, the exclusion of South Asian artists from the art establishment, and Kalapani, translating as Black Waters, which is a Brahminical injunction not to cross the oceans surrounding the South Asian subcontinent on threat of losing caste. And Alan de Souza has subsequently reflected that Crossing Black Waters was proposing Black Waters as a new coordinate in Black British art and politics at a time when Black political identity was being rearticulated in Britain. And in the introduction, de Souza sets this in context by constructing a history of Black Britain, beginning with, I'm sure this is all known to everyone as well, but just to reiterate, beginning with the colonised and formerly colonised people in post-war Britain who found Blackness in certain contexts a viable organising category for anti-colonial, anti-racist, international socialist and feminist resistance movements that could kind of group together alliances between different diasporas. This usage of Blackness was always contested. For instance, the dispute between Shaka Dedi and Rashida Reen at the 1982 First National Black Art Convention in Wolverhampton. At the time of Crossing Black Waters, this already contested usage of Blackness was going out of favour, and there were many contributing factors to this, including the state's response to uprisings across Britain in the 1980s in the form of multiculturalism, which endorsed religious and ethnic constituencies and thereby fragmented political alliances. And among many other factors were the divergence of socio-economic positions among Black and Brown communities, notably the rise of a South Asian middle class dominated by Indians and twice migrated South Asians from East Africa. So it was in this context that Crossing Black Waters proposed new political formations framed by a reworked definition of Blackness. And this conceptual intervention was presented on the cover of the book, where the word crossing bisects the word black, penetrating the open space above the foot of the capital L. The letters in crossing are also arranged vertically, whereas black and waters are set horizontally underneath, inviting the reader to turn her body or the book in order to decipher them. For me, this encapsulates the conceptual maneuver of Crossing Black Waters, which punctured and reopened debates around the term black and offered a reoriented meaning. However, and this is kind of where I want to start raising questions around radical, this approach to Blackness as a relatively open signifier whose genealogy could be rerouted to South Asia and reinvested with meaning, decontextualized Black politics from struggles against enslavement in African diasporic contexts. It also failed to address South Asian anti-Blackness and proximity to whiteness, particularly among the East African Asian diaspora to which all members of Panchayat belonged. The curators also did not take the question of caste beyond the analogy of Kalapani or the Black Waters. And though this is perhaps unsurprising, given that caste was not on the agenda in this specific geography of descent, caste does play a constitutive role in the formation of South Asian identities and cannot be left out of a discussion on the South Asian politics of race. The question is whether art history, or any other critical discourse that has yet to do so, can learn the language of caste and keep in view longer colonial histories, like South Asian colonial collaboration in East Africa, perhaps borrowing from South Asian studies, in order to articulate the complex political implications of exhibitions like Crossing Black Waters. So the curators of Crossing Black Waters stressed that their proposed politics of blackness, rerouted through the Kalapani, did not belong exclusively to South Asians. They made clear that the exhibition was merely initiating a dialogue which would remain unfinished if it only circulated among South Asians, and which needed to be returned to the broader political community. So here it was just kind of a testing out. And in the introduction to the book, which I've cited, D'Souza argues in defense of potential misconceptions that Crossing Black Waters was advocating narrow ethno-nationalist political formations, that, quote, the exploration of difference away from a central power base does not constitute division. It enhances the possibility of alliance on equal levels of acknowledgement. So that's quite a kind of packed statement. And the exhibition's experiment in grouping artists and cultural activists together while registering their differences along the lines of subcontinent diaspora, as well as other differentiating factors such as gender, was put forward materially in the exhibition catalogue, or I want to suggest that it was. So the book consists of artists' individual profiles written by themselves, as well as by friends, partners, and critics. So the contents page reads Alan D'Souza by Yong Soon Min, Shaheen Murali by Sunil Gupta, and so on, which were simultaneously passed and brought together by translucent tracing paper pages, bestowing an opacity which Edouard Glissant has argued is necessary for an ethics of difference, and a transparency which enables them to nonetheless come together in strategic alliance. This experiment in upholding specificity in a community was staged among South Asians, but Panchayat insisted that it had to be reproduced among other groups, which could link up with Crossing Black Waters to form a wider collective. Panchayat sparked this by collaborating on the Crossing Black Waters book with Working Press, a working class independent press. And this is the logo from the back of the book, the one beneath glass. Moreover, D'Souza later worked with the curators of Across the Pacific at the Queen's Museum in New York and Memories of Overdevelopment at UC Irvine Art Gallery, which exhibited Korean artists from the US and Korea and Filipino artists from the Philippines and the Filipino diaspora, respectively, to bring the conceit of Crossing Black Waters to new collective contexts. Okay, so I'll end there, but I just want to return to the questions that I raised just now about South Asians, about Black political identity, and about caste. In view of this conference on the radical decade, I'd like to ask, what do we do when we go looking for radicality in this genealogy of exhibitions, but find it delimited, as I did when researching this exhibition? And does an exhibition have to be radical in order to be important? Okay.